Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the Latinista and SimplyLead, we welcome you to our session today, and we are glad you are here. Before we proceed with today's programming, I'd like to just share a little bit about the Latinista and SimplyLead. So my name is Yoli Valencia, and I joined the Latinista a few years ago. I would say about 3 to 4 years ago, when the Latinista was introduced to Chicago and became a core member of the Chicago chapter. I am currently residing out of Miami. I consider myself a snowbird. And so a little more about the Latinista and enough about me. The Latinista was founded in 2012 with the mission of providing dynamic professional development workshops for women invested in career and leadership development, building community, and learning new career skills. When Latinista came to Chicago, it offered us something that we all longed for, especially professional women that really wanted to build community with like-minded individuals. SimplyLead was started by two queer women of color, Jennifer and Simone, who we'll have the pleasure of hearing from shortly. They believe perpetual systemic inequities trap potential and mute expression. SimplyLead believes in a dynamic, co-designed, action-driven approach that centers around common humanity in order to address these inequities. SimplyLead seeks to inform, educate, and support organizations focused on creating anti-racist spaces and empowering marginalized communities. So ladies, thank you for joining us, and I will let you take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yoli. We are so excited to be here today and to talk a little bit about anti-Blackness in our communities of color. Before we dive deep, I'm Jen. We're going to really take a moment to name that this Black History Month will be celebrated amidst a wave of shameful restrictions across the nation. 14 states have put limits on teaching about the nation's racial past. 81 anti-protest bills have been introduced in 34 states. 440 voter suppression bills have been introduced in 29 states. And we're here today to talk about the work and talk about truly being allies to one another as people of color. So we wanted to take a second to really just name that. And during this month of Black History, we're here to share a little bit more with you and just be here and be present with you all. And we're excited to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the flow. So today's flow, we're going to do, oh, sorry, I actually can't see the presentation, but that's okay. I got it. Perfect. Oh, thank you, Simone. We're going to talk a little bit about logistics. So we are new to Crowd Scout, so be patient with us. We'll do introductions, some community agreements and norm setting. We're going to dive deep into a virtual community builder, an introduction to anti-Blackness. We'll save some space for questions and answers, and then we'll do a little closing after that. So I can start with introductions. I am Jen. I'm the founder and CEO of SimplyLead. A little bit about myself. I was from Puerto Rico, or am from Puerto Rico. I've been in education for about 16 plus years, started in the classroom. I've done central admin roles as well. A lot of my work has been around advocacy and policy. And now I'm doing a lot of work around anti-racism, spent a good amount of time in Colorado in schools there, and briefly in DC. That's where I met Simone, my amazing business partner. And we started SimplyLead a while ago, about over a year ago. And so now we're doing this work across school systems, across organizations in tech and finance, and really just diving deep into the communities and creating and building that impact as well. I'm going to pause because I don't see the presentation. So I'm going to ask Yoli to see if other folks can see Simone and the presentation. So give us one.
No, it looks like we lost Simone.
Okay, give us 1 sec. Okay, she's coming right back. Apologies. And while we're waiting for Simone, I can just share a little bit more about kind of our approach and what we do. So SimplyLead in general, we do take a three-pronged approach to the work that we do. We don't usually do lots of lectures, and so this is a new platform and a new way for us to do the work with you. So today we're sharing a lot of information. Usually we really like to do a lot of unlearning, and in that process, we sort of dive deep into the history of racism in America. And then we do a process of redesigning, which is where folks get to do a lot of that co-designing work with us. They get to really dive deep into dismantling current systems of oppression, wherever that might lead or be in their spaces. And then we actually get to act and redesign that space with them. So it's a really amazing, long process, but a really great journey for folks who are doing this work with us. And so today we're sharing a lot of information. We'll be talking a lot and sharing a lot, and you all can share back in the chat with us. So it's a little bit different, but we'll talk through it, and we'll also share at the end other ways in which we can share this information with you in other ways. Simone, you're back.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
back. Were you able to soldier on without me?
Yeah, we just shared a little bit more about SimplyLead. I introduced myself, and now you can introduce yourself. But if you want to share the screen, if that's helpful and working for you, and then you can go ahead and introduce yourself. And I talked a little bit about us, Simone, so you can skip that slide as well and just jump into agreements after you introduce yourself. Either way.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So sorry for the technical issues, everyone. Hello, I'm so excited to be here. My name is Simone Egwu. I am the co-founder and chief strategy officer here at SimplyLead. I am a first-generation American, a first-generation college student. My parents are from Germany, Nigeria. I years in strategy consulting with a heavy focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in corporate and philanthropic sector. Personally and professionally passionate about this work, and hopefully Jen has told you all of the good stuff about SimplyLead and how we like to do this from an interactive, sort of dialogue-focused way. And today we're just getting to share a little bit of a sample of what it is we do with you all.
Perfect.
It looks like, is anyone else experiencing issues with audio? Are folks having trouble hearing?
Let's see. I think
you were, yeah, I think you were cutting off a little bit, Simone. So maybe keep your camera off. It might help with the bandwidth.
Okay.
But it was fine. We caught the end of the introduction. You did cut off a little bit in the beginning.
That's so sad because I felt like it was a great introduction, but that's all right. Let's waste no more time and we can get into it. Jen, are you ready to talk a little bit about our agreements for this space?
Yeah, so we're going to dive into the community agreements. We really want folks to just give and receive welcome. So please make sure that we treat each other with respect and welcome in that conversation. Be present as fully as possible. We're having some technical difficulties, bear with us, but be as present as you can with us in this moment. If you have fears and you are kind of on this journey, just be as present as you can. If you need some space and some time away from this information, do that as well. What is offered in this circle is by invitation, not demand. So do what your soul calls for. Your soul knows your needs better than we do. Speak your truth in ways that respect other people. We do not accept any kind of hate speech in this space. And so we'll be minding the chat. And if folks are sort of in that space, we will remove you from our space. We want you to, there's no fixing, saving, advising, or correcting. And so in this space, we're sharing information, we're sharing historical facts, and we're coming into this space with as our authentic selves in our intersectional identities. And then when going gets rough, turn to wonder. If you're feeling triggered, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, if you're feeling heavy or triggered or in a space of uncertainty, just take a moment, take a pause, and think about why you're feeling that way, and give yourself grace in that process. All right, is Simone with us? Perfect.
Okay, hopefully folks can hear me now.
Yes.
I am, okay. So before we jump into a community builder, just want to talk a little bit about intersectionality, recognizing that we have a really diverse group with us, usually in any space. And in this, we know that our audience is diverse. And today, see you, and we are focused today on anti-Blackness and how that shows up in our communities of color. If you don't identify as Black, Latinx, or Afro-Latinx, or any intersectional identity of the latter, please join us in being an ally in this space. If you don't identify with those communities, we're asking you not to take up space today, but understand that this is a time to learn. From that, we'll jump into our community builders so we can get to know each other a little bit better.
Yeah, I really appreciate folks sharing where they're from, their name, and all of that. We really want folks to share just a little more deeply about who you are. If you can take 1 minute to write out your full name and reflect on a few things. If you want to share, how did you get your name? Where does it come from? What meanings are attached to that name? Or if there's a story linked to your name. So we're going to give you about 1 minute. Write it in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and share as well. And then we might share some out and in the process. So take about 1 minute, and I'll give us a 30-second reminder, and we'll come back together in a few. Thank you for sharing, Jai. That's beautiful. If other folks want to share, we'll give it about 30 more seconds. Yes, I feel like our moms tell us these stories, but they're amazing. And if you're done sharing or you're still typing, plug it into the chat. And hopefully, if you're done, just read through other folks and how they're sharing about themselves and their stories and their names. We'll give it about 20 more seconds. Yeah. Deborah, I'm going to share yours. It says you were named after the biblical Deborah, who was a judge. It was a pretty rare name in Puerto Rico at the time. And then you moved to the mainland. Thank you for sharing. It's beautiful. Named after a Mexican singer, Yolanda, an actress. Beautiful. I appreciate everyone sharing. And if you haven't shared yet, please do. And if you want to read through other folks' stories about their name, go ahead and do so. And we're going to move on into some foundational works and elements for the work ahead. Thank you for spending some time with us and sharing a little bit more deeply about yourselves.
Thanks, Shem. The audio okay?
Yes.
Every time I talk, I need to check. Okay. So thanks for setting that up. So excited to get to know about the folks we have here with us today and about everybody's really unique stories. One of my favorite things I think about folks of color is that all of our names seem to have really special stories, whether it's a tie to a place, to a person, to a family member. I really love that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the foundational elements of what is going to sort of undergird the next 30 minutes of work that we're going to do together. These are the bricks, or sort of the beliefs that we are going to walk on throughout this journey that we're going to take over the next 30 minutes. We're not asking you to, 100% believe these things or, understand them fully, but just know that this is where we're coming from and where we're coming to you from. So first, at all times, we believe that we are either actively practicing being anti-racist or we are perpetuating white supremacy and racism in America. And what this means is that unless we're really actively thinking about how race, society sort of an effect or carry weight in almost every interaction in this country, we are possibly allowing and perpetuating white supremacy by not thinking about sort of the effects of race and how we can undo that work in this interaction. Secondly, the US is a racial state built on a racial hierarchy, and that impacts all levels of social interaction from the micro to the macro. This means our country was built on the idea that some races are superior and others are inferior. I think the easiest example of that is chattel slavery. White folks brought Black folks over from Africa and decided that they weren't human, but they were good enough to work the fields. And then finally, white supremacy benefits from division between minority groups to maintain its majority power. So by keeping minority groups and minorities divided, and at times even pitted against each other, white supremacy benefits because it maintains the majority over these fractured small groups. In short, solidarity between people of color is necessary to dismantle white supremacy. We all should be working together and thinking about each other's experience under this really heavy weight of white supremacy. So moving from those sort of bricks, we are going to start taking our first few steps. So first, we talked about white supremacy. What is it? Let's try and break it down a little bit. What does it mean that our country sort of is built, survives on having a racial hierarchy? It means that one race is superior to another. And what does that practice turn into? It looks like racism. White supremacy is this idea of power built on that sort of fundamental foundational belief that the white race is the superior race. And this belief can be perpetuated consciously or unconsciously by people of color. And we see it show up in a lot of different contexts, whether it's interpersonal interaction, whether it is something that we see like in our social or cultural or political institution. I'm thinking of voting rights suppression and how often the rights being suppressed are those in communities of color. And so we've talked about white supremacy. Let's try and break down what exactly is racism. Racism is this thing that has to exist in order for white supremacy to exist. Racism is almost what I would call the ideology of white supremacy in action. And the key thing here to know about racism is that it requires an element of power. Racism is prejudice, that belief that your race is superior, combined with social and institutional power, meaning that you have the power, you're involved in enough institutions, you have a grip on them, and that you can set those institutions up to carry out systematic discrimination. That's really the firm difference between racism and prejudice. The power to make your prejudice the law of the land, that's when we're talking about racism. So how does racism show up in sort of different ways in our society? It's more than just, like I said, those interpersonal interactions. White supremacy is this system that supports all of the ways in which we internalize racism. It forces us to believe that being Black is inferior to existing as white, and that we must push towards a proximity to whiteness in order to sort of have a good life, because Black is not the right thing. We're conditioned to do this both consciously and unconsciously. And racism shows up in sort of all different ways, whether it's in the structural ways, and those I think are looking at things like how folks of color will have depressed wages when compared to non-folks of color. Institutional racism, we see things in different institutions in our country, like medical racism, again, going back to voting rights. And anti-Blackness can show up in all of these different types of racism. Keep going one too far. Okay. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about what exactly is anti-Blackness. We know what racism is. We've talked about white supremacy. We sort of think that that's all there is to it. We know not to be racist. We know not to be white supremacist. Not quite. So anti-Blackness, I'm sure as a person of color, you have heard at some point somebody say, I don't see color, therefore I can't be racist. But what's wrong with that? By saying that you don't see color, you are erasing the fact that people of color do actually have very different lived experiences in the racial hierarchy of our country. To say that you don't see color is to not acknowledge facts like the disproportionately high rates of incarceration that Black Americans face, or the distinct wage gap between Latinx Americans and white Americans. White supremacy thrives on this erasure, insisting that racism doesn't exist, and at the same time, keeping people of color busy proving that racism does in fact exist and that our lives do look different. Anti-Blackness sort of runs in that same vein of thinking. It's this concept that people of color within the racial hierarchy have different nuanced experiences themselves that are unique. Anti-Blackness is a form of racism that's specifically damaging to Black people or people who are visibly or perceived to be of African descent. So this concept counters the idea that all ethnic minorities in the racial hierarchy have the same sort of experience of racism, and rather gets at the idea that depending on how you look and sort of where you may be descended from, racism can feel and look very different for you in practice.
Yeah, and so thank you so much, Simone. And so we're going to dive a little bit deeper. This is a visual.
And then I'm going to throw it to Jen, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how anti-Blackness can show up in all of these different levels of racism.
Sorry, Simone, I think I was buffering. Can you all hear me okay? Yoli, will you give me a thumbs up? Perfect. Okay, so this is a more visual representation of what we were just talking about. And so white supremacy is the system that supports all of the ways in which we internalize racism. It forces us to believe existing as Black is inferior to existing as white. And so that's why we sort of hold it at the top. And anti-Blackness can exist in each of these spaces. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper and give more examples in each one as to how it shows up as we move forward in this space. And Simone, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you can change the slide. Let's see. Let's give me one sec. I think she lost audio.
The slide moved.
Oh, perfect.
Jen.
Okay, great. Let's see if I can get her back, but I'm going to go ahead and start here. So how does white supremacy uphold anti-Blackness? And so we were looking at the graphic a little bit earlier, and we have institutional, we have structural, we have internal and interpersonal. And so in these ways, you'll see anti-Blackness showing up throughout each. And it infiltrates every aspect of our system. And again, white supremacy depends on anti-Blackness in order to function, and it has been able to do so in all levels of racism. And I think I lost Simone again, so we're going to go ahead and keep chatting about it, and I'll give you a little bit of the descriptors until she gets back. So in structural and institutional, we can see anti-Blackness showing up, for example, in our justice system. So Black people are more likely to be convicted, arrested, and serve longer sentences. In workplaces, we see things like what is and isn't considered appropriate professional hair. Oftentimes, ethnic names on resumes are less likely to be granted interviews. When we look at schools, we have Black students are suspended at higher rates than any other racial group. And for example, we have school budgets depend on property taxes, and it disadvantages our poorer communities. We'll see it in housing. In healthcare, Black women die at higher rates giving birth than any other in the US. And again, in voting rights, we've seen that in the last few years with the gerrymandering. It's happening at all times. So those are different examples of how it shows up structurally and institutionally. And then how does it manifest internally and interpersonally? So internalized oppression is a process in which people in marginalized groups make oppression personal, right? Coming to believe that the lies and the prejudice and the stereotypes about them are true. And so members of target groups exhibit internalized oppression when they alter those attitudes, behaviors, and speech, and other traits to mirror the stereotype and the dominant culture, which is the white culture. So we see that through colorism. Assimilation is something that we see, right? Am I coming into a space, in a workspace, for example, I'll straighten my hair, lower my hands, speak only in English, perhaps don't even speak in Spanish. And those are the ways in which you assimilate, and you're internalizing that the white dominant culture is superior to what your culture is. And so those are the ways in which it shows up internally and can also show up interpersonally. Okay, Simone, I think you're back. If you want to share your screen. I don't think I can. Oh, perfect. I can see it. Perfect. If you want to change the slide. And so we can see that anti-Blackness exists within communities of color. So I want to take a pause here, and please know that this can be triggering for some folks. But I ask that if you're feeling triggered, if your body or your heart or your brain are feeling tense or feeling any type of emotions, we ask that you push through that discomfort and reflect on why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. We're going to dive deeper into how white supremacy has forced the hand of Latinos for centuries to choose proximity to whiteness and perpetuate anti-Blackness. And while we can share how history and white supremacy have forced Latinos to choose, it's our responsibility to dismantle the system that currently gives us both that white passing privilege and anti-Black and anti-Latino oppression in America. So take a few seconds to read this quote, and we're going to invite you to write a few words in the chat about what comes up for you and what we've already shared, what this quote brings up for you, or anything that has been coming up for you since we've started outside of our technical difficulties. And I'll give it about one more minute. Okay, I'm going to pop open the chat and see if folks are sharing. Culture definitely impacted matters. Yeah. Thank you, Hazel, for sharing. It definitely impacted your understanding of your own identity in the Dominican Republic. Yeah, so there's a lot that can come up. We're going to dive a little bit deeper. I'm going to ask Simone to please switch the slide. I really want to talk a little bit about how white supremacy has historically perpetuated anti-Blackness in the Latino communities. Let me just make sure. Now I don't see Yoli. I'm going to pause and give us a few more seconds in the chat. Okay, let's see. Share screen. Okay, I think we're going to have to switch some stuff around. If y'all just give me one sec. I'm going to try and share my screen instead. I think some stuff is crashing. Deborah, thank you for sharing. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Even within our own family structures, we see colorism show up. Let's see. Okay, share screen. I'm going to try and do a presenter view on my end since I think Simone is frozen. And if you keep sharing in the chat, I would appreciate it. Yeah, anti-Blackness is prevalent in our Spanish language media outlets, from casting more like colored European reporters. Absolutely. Okay, let's see. All right, I'm going to try and share my screen as well. Here. Huh. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure if I am sharing my screen either. Oh my goodness. This is hilarious, everyone. Share. Okay. Can I get some thumbs up in the chat if anyone can see my screen or my presenter view? Or someone, Yoli, if you can say it out loud, because I actually can't see you either. Or Jai, or Yoli, or Simone. Am I on my own here?
I'm here, and the chat says we can see you.
Perfect. Can you see the slide that's up on how white supremacy?
I can see the slide.
Perfect. Can you see it in presenter view?
No, I see the slide.
Right, without the notes in presenter view?
Without the notes. It's
okay,
good.
Fantastic. All right, this has been a great day so far with technology. So I'm going to dive. I really appreciate everyone who's been sharing in the chat, and I also do appreciate everyone being very patient with the tech today. It's been kind of wild. I want to dive a little bit deeper into how white supremacy has historically perpetuated anti-Blackness in our Latino communities. And to give us a little bit of context, you know, the Caribbean was first colonized by Spain in the 1500s, and for about 150 years, prior to enslaved Africans being brought to America in 1619, Spanish colonizers were enslaving indigenous people and African slaves. And by the late 1600s, other European colonizers, including British American or colonizers, were colonizing parts of the Caribbean and Latin America. And throughout that transatlantic slave trade, over 10 million African slaves were brought to the Caribbean and Latin America to work in the sugar plantations. As more indigenous people and Black people fought for their freedom and revolted, some were actually able to fight for that freedom. They were able to retake their freedom. And eventually, in about the 1900s, slavery began to be dismantled. And so what that looked like was an emancipation of Black and indigenous people, but white people needed to pivot in order to continue to hold that power. So the colonizers turned to government and built out immigration laws to diminish the access and mobility of recently emancipated slaves. And so blanqueamiento, which means to whiten, is a direct outcome of white supremacy, and countries began to recruit European immigrants to whiten their people. And so blanqueamiento really incentivized legal flexibility, financial stability, and moving up, quote unquote, on the casta system or caste system. An example of this is in Argentina. They opened their doors only to European immigrants and doubled their white population in doing so. And so throughout this process as well, indigenous people were also being incentivized to assimilate to the white dominant culture in order to access more privileges, while at the same time, there were restrictions on the lives of Black people through jobs, religions, and quality of education. So those are historically some of the ways in which it shows up. Another example is this concept of Latinidad, and it's using the term, like when we use the term BIPOC, where it's trying to say that all Latinos share a common lived experience, where there's sort of this kumbaya of Latinos, when in fact we do share the same culture, but not the exact same history. And so in grouping all Latinos through Latinidad, you're creating erasure of Afro-Latinos and other groups of folks in the Caribbean and in Latin America. And this also denies, right, our Afro-Latinos their history. And when we think about the word Latino and including Afro-Latino, we're saying that the default to being a Latino is white. And thus having to put Afro in front of the word Latino is identifying your Blackness within your Latino-ness. And so that's also another way in which white supremacy sort of perpetuates white supremacy in the hierarchy of how they're thinking of things based on how they force us to identify in that process. Another example of how all of this sort of unfolds throughout history is using the census process. And so it forces throughout history to force Latinos to choose white or Black or other as their racial identity in some points in time, and always to benefit white people and benefit and oppress Black people. And so that's another sort of example that you see in how white supremacy has historically perpetuated anti-Blackness in our Latino communities. And so how do we continue, right? How do we continue to uphold that? This is another example of the same image that you saw earlier. And what I've done is put a few of the examples in each level that really shows us how in our Latino community, we can see those things being perpetuated. So again, white supremacy is a system that supports all of the ways in which we internalize racism. When we think about structural, I gave a really good example of that just in the last slide. So blanqueamiento is a structural way in which it shows up and how white supremacy upholds that anti-Blackness. Institutional, I'm sure some of you have heard in dañando la raza. So when folks are trying to create or build on that blanqueamiento due to those incentives, you will hear family members and folks saying, if you're marrying into brown or Black people in Latin America, they'll say, oh, está dañando la raza, you're ruining the race. And what they're saying is that you're right, you're not whitening the race. And so that's a way in which it shows up in Latin America institutionally. When we're talking about each other or interpersonally with other folks, it's that proximity to whiteness. And what I mean by that is cuando me conviene. And that is, it's really about ways in which you show up and you present your whiteness or white privilege when it's of convenience to you, but you also come to the table with your POC status when that is convenient to you. So at times I can be, let's say, in a space where I know that the white dominant culture is the culture, right, of holding power, and I want to be in that power. So I will perhaps, again, like I shared earlier, straighten my hair or pull it back, put my hands down. I won't speak in Spanish. I'll only speak in English. I don't, try not to have a heavy accent. So all of these things are interpersonal. So I'm trying to have that relationship with other people. And when it's a benefit to me and when it's not a benefit to me, I can say, oh, well, I'm a person of color. White people are racist. That's not me. And so I can say, well, I'm Latina, so that's not my problem. And so again, I'm using that as convenience to me interpersonally. And finally, internalized, we had some folks in the chat who were sharing about colorism, even within their own family. And you've heard, some folks have heard pelo malo, which means bad hair. So when we talk about the types of hair that we think are beautiful, are Eurocentric, and we're always, back home trying to straighten the hair, pull on the curls, and we say, tiene el pelo malo, or your hair is bad versus your hair is good, is another way in which we internalize systems of oppression and uphold white supremacy in our Latino communities. I'm just going to take a quick pause and because I can't see the screen. So I'm going to see if Simone is online. I just want to make a quick check. Simone, if you can just share if you are with me.
I'm here, Jen.
We're going to keep moving. I can't see the chat, Simone, so please mind the chat for me. I'm going to kind of keep moving us forward so that we can get to the questions and answers. This is really about responsabilidad propia. And, I gave a lot of information. There's a lot to unpack in that. And because this is only an hour long, there really isn't enough time to share everything and anything, all the nuances of how white supremacy has impacted and continues to impact our communities of color, and specifically our Latino communities. But what we want to do is take that responsibility and really become allies for other folks and for our Black families, for our Afro-Latino families, for all, right? So that liberation for all is where we're moving towards. And in order to do that, I think that white passing Latinos really need to come to terms with our privilege in the context of anti-Blackness. Whether you were born in the US, in Latin America, or in the Caribbean, accept the reality that we also come from a racist society that is embedded in white supremacy. As a Puerto Rican, or as Puerto Ricans, we share the same culture, but we don't all own that same history. And so as a white Puerto Rican, I really must own that my skin isn't light skin, my skin is white. And the conscious and unconscious practices of that cuando me conviene, when it's convenient, allows me the privilege to toggle between conveying my POC status and my white passingness. And in these actions, I'm actively perpetuating anti-Blackness and I'm upholding white supremacy. And so in order to dismantle white supremacy and truly be a practicing anti-racist, as a white Puerto Rican, I must first identify my whiteness and then betray it, renounce that, and renounce the comfort that it provides me. And so what we want is for all of us to really come and build on that responsibility. We want you and us to understand our Latino history and really dive deep into the nuances and of what that truly is and how that truly has been built. Use your privilege to call out racism and support the true liberation of all people, and understand and advocate against anti-Black policies being put into place in your cities. We talked a little bit earlier about what's currently happening across the US, across the nation, again, policies that are being put in place in schools and in voting rights. And so really become an active person in your community and show up as a Latino, as an Afro-Latino, as whoever you are in all of your intersectional identities to push against and dismantle white supremacy. And by doing that, we can sort of create liberation for all and challenge assimilation. I think that is definitely very difficult. I came from Puerto Rico. I was almost in my late 20s. I went straight from Puerto Rico to Boulder, Colorado, and the culture shock was very hard. And in order to feel safe and in order to feel like I belonged, I went through the process of really assimilating and, pulling my hair and doing these things that we've talked about before, and only speaking in English and really focusing on white culture and understanding that culture and really betraying my cultura and who I was in Puerto Rico because I felt like that was what I needed to do. And I didn't at the time understand that in doing that, I was also perpetuating anti-Blackness and upholding white supremacy. So it's really about being able to take all of that, accept it, and sit with it and hold it. And I think it can be triggering and hard, but that's what we need to do in order to push back and dismantle white supremacy. And we need to do that all together. And so these are a few ways in which we can do that. And I'm going to go ahead and put us on a pulse check. Simone, I know you can see, I think you can see the screen, so I'm going to let you go ahead and kind of take us through this breather.
Yes, I'm still here, Jen.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, everybody, for your patience with technology today. It's so great when it works. So we like to do a little pulse check for folks, knowing that the work we're doing and the content we're covering can be difficult. It can be triggering. Just going to ask everybody to take a few moments to take a quick scan of your body. Start with a deep breath in, 3 deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. And as you're breathing, scan the body and see what came up for you physically while we were talking about anti-Blackness, communities of color, these really difficult topics. Allowing your mind to sort of walk its way down your body and see if there's any tension, any tightness, any difficult emotions that you're having trouble unpacking. And as you continue to breathe, check in with your heart. Use this moment, these few breaths, this quick pause to just try and understand those feelings that you might have come across, to try and understand where they're coming from, how your heart is sort of taking in everything that we've gone through today. I'll give everyone 15 to 30 seconds. Breathing in, breathing out. If you find any difficult emotions, breathe your way through them. And let's come back to center. Hopefully that was clearing. We were able to get some things worked through.
Appreciate it. We're going to ask you to do a quick reflection and take a minute to really think about what was your first experience learning positive things about Blackness. and Black people? And what was your first experience with anti-Black racism? If you have a little more time, how can white supremacy influence your thinking about minority groups that you're not a part of? And we're going to do about maybe a minute because we really want to get to the Q&A. But if you want to share in the chat, you don't have to. This can be a reflection just for yourself internally. You can journal, you can write, you can just think, you can close your eyes. We want you to really think about what was those first experiences and how white supremacy influences your thinking about minority groups that you are not a part of. If you'd like to share, we invite you to share in the chat, and we'll give it about 1 minute and then I'll bring us back. We're going to do about 30 more seconds. And if you have any questions that are coming up and you want to plug them into the chat, you can do so as well. And we'll try and answer a few of them before we end our time with you today. And I'm going to just pause and see if Simone has anything that anyone wants to share before we move on to Q&A.
It looks like folks are a little shy in the chat, and that's okay.
That's okay. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of information that was covered. So take a moment if you want to reflect on this on your own. And we're going to, if you have questions, please plug them into the chat as well. I'm going to give us about a minute to plug in any questions into the chat, and then we'll let Simone share some out with us, and we'll hopefully be able to answer some for you before we close out and share a little bit about how we can serve you in other ways. I'll leave it here for about 30 seconds to a minute, and I'm going to let Simone mind this for us.
Let's see. Great question from Yai. How can we support during Black History Month?
Yeah, such a wonderful question. Simone, you want to take this one or me?
I think you named some really great solutions or ways to support Jen, so you take this one.
Okay, fantastic. I really feel like, again, it's really about going into your communities and becoming an ally and asking questions. And don't be afraid to go into any community and ask. And it's really about understanding the policies that are being put into place right now to continue to perpetuate white supremacy and that erasure of our cultures and of our history, and understanding that. Another ways, I think that's probably one of the best ways to be an ally right now and through Black History, and not just through Black History Month, but throughout your entire life, throughout every month, right? Because Black history is American history, and we are all a part of perpetuating white supremacy, but also we're a part of dismantling it. And it's really about owning the privileges that you do have. We all have a certain privilege that we can use to really dismantle this system. And another thing that you can do is really dive deep with folks who are doing the work in the history and understanding how it has become what it is in the last 400 to 500 years, and really understand how you are a part of that history and how you can then be a part of dismantling it and building something that can be liberating for all of us, for Latinos, for all communities of color, and everyone. So those are a few ways that I would recommend. Simone, if you have any others, let me know. But if there's another question in the chat, we can jump to it as well.
I love those suggestions, Jen. I would add also to be really vocal and open about your allyship. And don't be afraid of difficult conversations. I think sometimes, conversations about race can be really controversial and tough in our country. And I think coming into those conversations, willing to listen and understanding that what folks are sharing might not really have anything to do with you, but rather just making space for that, I think is another really great way to be an ally. We've got some good questions. Any nonprofits you can direct us to donate money? I'm going to come back to that one. Thank you, Yai.
Yes.
Do you recommend any resources around racial trauma? From Hazel. I've been dealing with stuff at work and it's been harder these days to focus. I'm sorry to hear that, Hazel.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question. I do have some off the top of my head. I won't be able to give you the exact resources, but what I can do is we'll share our website and our emails at the end, and you can send us an email, and I will gladly share resources. Simone and I do some work around racial healing or racial trauma, and that generational trauma that exists within our bodies. Simone, if you want to talk a little bit more about that, I know that's your expertise as well, but we do similar work in that as well.
Yeah, everything Jen said is great. We do a lot of work around sort of healing the physical trauma of racial trauma. And a lot of that work is based on a book, I'm going to put the name in the chat, called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. It's a really, really great read about sort of working through the ways that, well, one, recognizing the ways that racial trauma is trauma and can show up and manifest physically, and sort of some exercises, both physical and I think mental, to maybe help you work through some of that. And as Jen said, please feel free to reach out to us. We do this all the time. Happy to talk about it. Yeah. We have another question. How do you address friends or family who think they have a get out of jail card because they have Black friends or relatives? It's a really great question.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I really think it's about having the difficult conversation, starting with yourself. I think it's harder to talk to someone else without sharing about yourself, and making sure that you are owning your privilege, that you're owning the ways in which you feel you are perpetuating white supremacy, and sharing those examples, and then bringing that up in the conversation. No one has a free pass. And so it's really about being open, being vulnerable, and sharing your experiences, and then asking them and push them, right? Push them in the right direction when you're having those conversations with family about having about someone, I forgot the question, but about having these difficult conversations about having Black friends so you're not technically racist. But if you want to add a little bit more.
Yeah, that was the question. I think this one is tough. I think a good way to maybe there's tons of different strategies. Jen offered some great stuff, but one I like to use is asking people, like, what have you talked with your Black friends about race? Because if people of color, I imagine we have folks of color with us today, and we know this, if folks of color are not talking to you about problems with race because it's an ever-present problem for us, they probably don't feel safe talking to you. So sort of working through that and asking folks to unpack, I think, can be a good question to maybe invite more reflection on the part of folks who you're talking with.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more. There's another one, Simone, and then we're going to go ahead and close this out.
Question. Oh, yes. Okay. I've got some good comments in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Maria is sharing, my family didn't mention anything good about Blackness and Black people besides the culture part of the Bamba and Plena, and very out of place comments like Daniela Arasa. Going to college was when I got the chance of interacting and learning more about Black culture. I love that.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have another question from Deborah. My nieces are between the age of 3 and 15. If you have any resources that can address these issues in an age-appropriate way, I'd appreciate it. The racist messaging starts young, and I feel like I need to shield them from the nasty. Great question.
Yes, it's a fantastic question. I would recommend, Ibram Kendi just came out with a book on how to talk about race with your children. Fantastic resource. That's somewhere where I go to. There's other books as well. And again, off the top of my head, that's the one that comes up for me. But Daniel Tatum is another amazing author who does a lot of work around how to talk about race with students and children. And again, you can reach out to us and we'll happily share more resources. But those are the two that I think are coming up for me right now.
Yeah. Yes. Please reach out to us. I'm struggling to think of examples outside of Ibram Kendi's book right now either. But I did want to come back to Yai's question about nonprofits. I would say that we don't have a nonprofit that we specifically endorse, but rather we encourage folks to look into mutual aid in their communities. So mutual aid is this concept that, you know, we mutually aid each other in community by taking care of each other. So it is really about connecting directly with folks in your community who need things, whether it's food, whether it's direct cash assistance, whether it's a ride. DC has a really active and large mutual aid network, and I'm pretty involved with it. And some of the work that I've done for them includes I have this senior neighbor, and he needs help getting his medication from the pharmacy every month, and I just help him out with that. I just take care of his medication grab. During the pandemic, which is still happening, the mutual aid group, for example, was taking phone calls from seniors and homebound folks and getting them groceries free of charge. You know, the mutual aid group sort of figured it out. So look into that, see how you can put money directly into the hands of folks of color. Nonprofits are great and they do wonderful work, but more often than not, what folks really need is direct assistance. So encourage you to Google that. It's a pretty popular concept and hopefully you'll be able to find something.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Simone. Thank you. And to sort of start closing us out, we want you to take a few minutes. And first of all, thank you so much for spending the time with us today, for being so patient with all of our tech issues, and really being a part of this journey with us. We always ask folks to commit to an action. We want you to take a few minutes to write out your commitments to this work this year. Tell us what solidarity with other people of color means to you. What does it look like? And how will you begin to dismantle white supremacy and anti-Blackness? Just take a few minutes, put it in the chat if you'd like to share. If not, this is for personal sort of reflection for you. And so that isn't something that you need to share, but we hope that everyone considers taking an action and doing that throughout. And so we wanted to close out too, just sharing other ways in which we support organizations, people. We do a lot of workshops. So lectures, which is kind of what it looks like today, is not what we do often, but we love to do it. We're a part of panels and conferences, keynotes. We love to do workshops. We do executive coaching as well. And this is both for your personal and professional journey. Our website is here as well. You can write us and ask us anything, and we can share resources there. But we really like to dive deep into this work with folks and really truly create allies and create a space where we are dismantling white supremacy together so that it benefits all of us, so that we all are in liberation and we all are actively not in control of white supremacy and perpetuating anti-Blackness. And so we really want to thank all of you for being with us here today. I'm actually going to end the slideshow, but before I do, Simone, if you don't mind just plugging these into the chat as well. You see our names, our emails. You also have our website. Please reach out at any point with any questions or anything at all. I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone. And I do again want to just say thank you so much for being here with us today, for being patient with us and enjoying this journey. There's so much to share and there's so much to understand and learn and grow. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So we appreciate you spending some time with us, and I'll let Simone go ahead and close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really grateful that everybody showed up today, gave us your time, your energy in the chat. Please reach out to us. Thank you, Hazel. We will not worry about the tech issues. We love to talk about this. It's what we do. And if this feels like something that would be of interest to you or your organization, we're around. We love these conversations. And just thank you all for this opportunity.
Yeah, y'all have a great, fantastic rest of your evening. And we wish you all well. Have a good one.
Hey, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Happy Black History Month.
Actually, I don't even know if Yoli is still on. I don't know how to undo the live. So I'm just going to pause.
You just leave.
I just get